The Arena on Thraxian Prime was a cathedral of death. 50,000 seats rose in concentric rings around a circular pit of packed black sand, each row packed with citizens of the Imperium who had paid fortunes to witness the spectacle. Holographic banners rippled across the upper decks, displaying the face of Empress Selene Voss in her box, watching from behind a shimmering energy field that protected her from any theoretical threat. Not that any threat could reach her. Not here. Not ever. In the center of the sand stood the human. They called him that because they had stopped using his real name generations ago. He was a specimen now, a curiosity, a relic from a conquered world whose people had been scattered across 1,000 star systems. His name was Dorian Vance, though only he remembered that. To the announcer whose voice boomed across the arena, he was simply the Terran Primitive. To the crowd, he was entertainment. Dorian stood perfectly still. His chest was bare, revealing a map of scars that told stories the Imperium didn't want told. Some were from whips. Some were from blades. Some were from the claws of beasts he had been forced to fight in arenas just like this one, on a dozen different worlds over 20 years of captivity. His body had become a chronicle of survival, written in healed tissue and twisted sinew. Across from him, 50 meters away, stood this week's challenger. It was a Xar'thon Beast, imported from the jungles of some death world on the far side of the galaxy. 8 legs, each tipped with a blade of natural chitin. A carapace that could deflect projectile weapons. Mandibles that could shear through steel. The thing was the size of a ground transport, and it was hungry. The handlers had starved it for 3 standard weeks to ensure maximum aggression. Dorian didn't move. The crowd grew restless. They wanted blood. They wanted screams. They wanted the Terran Primitive to run, to beg, to show the fear that made the slaughter meaningful. But Dorian just stood there, breathing slow and even, his eyes fixed on the beast with an expression that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite calm. It was something else entirely. The Empress leaned forward in her box. Selene Voss had watched thousands of arena executions. She had seen brave men weep, seen proud warriors soil themselves, seen species go extinct in this very pit. But she had never seen anyone stand like this. The human wasn't trembling. His breathing was steady. His hands, though bound in ceremonial chains meant to rattle and remind him of his helplessness, hung loose at his sides. "What is he doing?" she murmured to her advisor, a thin man named Xar'thon who stood in the shadows behind her throne. "Meditating, Your Radiance," Eris replied. The Terrans had a tradition, a form of mental discipline before death. They believed it helped them face what came. How quaint. The Empress smiled, but her violet eyes never left the still figure below. Let's see how long his discipline lasts. The gong sounded. The Xar'thon lunged. Middle. It should have been over in seconds. The beast covered the distance in 3 heartbeats, its 8 legs a blur of motion, its mandibles already spreading to tear flesh from bone. The crowd roared with anticipation. This was the moment they had paid for, the moment when the Terran would break, would run, would scream, and then would die. Dorian sidestepped. It wasn't a dodge. It was a single, economical movement, barely more than a shift of weight. The Xar'thon's charge carried it past him, its mandibles snapping shut on empty air. The beast skidded in the black sand, confused for a moment, then wheeled around for another attack. The crowd fell silent. Dorian hadn't run. He hadn't screamed. He had simply moved. Just enough. Just precisely enough. The Empress sat up straighter. Again the beast charged. Again Dorian moved, a half step, a pivot, a lean that seemed impossible until it succeeded. The Xar'thon's bladed legs slashed through the space where he had been, and he was already somewhere else. always somewhere else. Never more than an inch from death, but never quite touching it. This is impossible, Eris breathed. His chains alone should throw off his balance. He should be dead. The Empress didn't respond. Her knuckles were white on the armrest of her throne. The Xar'thon was growing frustrated. It attacked with less precision now, more fury. Its mandibles snapped wildly. Its legs carved arcs through the air that should have hit something, should have drawn blood, should have ended this farce. But Dorian kept moving, and he kept not dying. And his face never changed. That was what disturbed the Empress most. She had seen courage. She had seen desperation. She had seen the blank acceptance of the truly broken. But this wasn't any of those things. This was something else. This was a man moving through a storm as if the storm didn't matter, as if the storm was just weather, and he had somewhere more important to be. After 7 minutes, the Xar'thon collapsed. Not from wounds. Dorian had never struck it, couldn't have struck it even if he'd tried, not with his hands bound. The beast collapsed from exhaustion, from confusion, from the sheer impossibility of what was happening. Its great body heaved in the sand, and it made a sound that might have been a whimper. The arena was dead silent. 50,000 people, and not one of them spoke. Not one of them cheered. They had come to see a killing, and instead they had witnessed something they couldn't explain. Something that made the foundations of their world feel suddenly, terribly unstable. Dorian stood over the fallen beast. He looked at it for a long moment, then raised his eyes to the Empress's box. Their gazes met across the vast distance, hers violet and bewildered, his gray and utterly calm. And then, for the first time in 20 years of captivity, Dorian Vance spoke. I am ready for the next one. The Empress rose from her throne. Middle continued. She descended from her box. This had never happened before. In the 1,000-year history of the Thraxian arena, no ruler of the Imperium had ever walked onto the sand. It was forbidden. It was unthinkable. Her guards scrambled to form a protective cordon around her, their silver masks swiveling wildly as they searched for threats that might not exist, but might suddenly appear. The crowd erupted, not with cheers, with gasps, with shouts of alarm, with the chaos of 50,000 people realizing they were witnessing history and had no idea what it meant. The Empress ignored them all. She walked across the black sand until she stood 10 meters from Dorian Vance. Close enough to see the gray in his hair, the scars on his chest, the chains on his wrists. Close enough to see that his eyes held no hatred, no fear, no defiance. Just that terrible, unnerving calm. Why? She demanded. Dorian tilted his head slightly. Why what? Your radiance? Why didn't you run? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you do what every other creature in this pit has done for 1,000 years? Her voice was shaking, and she hated that it was shaking. I have seen warriors from 100 worlds die here. I have seen them beg, seen them cry, seen them curse my name and the names of their gods. But I have never, she stopped, unable to finish. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. You've seen people die, Empress. You've never seen anyone live. What does that mean? It means you don't understand what I'm fighting for. He looked past her, at the empty seats, at the banners, at the symbols of an empire that had crushed his world and scattered his people. You think I'm fighting to survive. You think I'm fighting to escape. You think I'm fighting because I hope, somehow, to see freedom again. Aren't you? Dorian shook his head slowly. I stopped hoping for freedom years ago. I stopped hoping for rescue, for revenge, for any of the things that keep most men going. Hope is a chain, Empress. Hope is what they use to control you, because as long as you hope, you'll do what they say. You'll behave. You'll wait for a tomorrow that never comes." The Empress stared at him. She had never heard anyone speak like this. She had never heard anyone think like this. "Then what?" she whispered. "What are you fighting for?" Dorian looked down at his bound hands. When he raised his eyes again, they held something new. Not hope, not defiance. Something quieter. Something deeper. "I'm fighting for them." He nodded toward the edge of the arena, where the shadows pooled beneath the lowest seats. The Empress followed his gaze and saw nothing. Just shadows. Just darkness.
"There's no one there," she said.
"Yes, there is." Dorian smiled, the first smile he had shown in 20 years. "There are always people in the shadows, Empress. The ones who aren't in the seats. The ones who can't afford tickets. The ones who sneak in because they need to see something, need to believe something, need to know that somewhere in this universe there's still a person who won't break." The Empress felt something cold crawl down her spine. The undercastes. The slaves. The people like me, Dorian finished. The conquered. The forgotten. The ones your empire stepped on and never looked back to see if they were still breathing. He gestured at the silent arena. "There are hundreds of them in the shadows right now, watching, waiting. And every time I refuse to die, every time I refuse to scream, every time I stand here like a man instead of an animal, they see it. They remember it. And one day, Empress, they'll do something about it." The Empress's face went white. She spun to face her guards. "Clear the shadows.
Now.
Find every last one of them, and—" "They're already gone," Dorian said quietly. "They always leave before the lights come up. That's how they survive." He met her eyes again. "That's how we all survive. In the dark. In the quiet. In the spaces you never think to check." The Empress stood frozen. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never felt before. Not fear of assassination. Not fear of rebellion. Something deeper. Something existential. She felt the weight of 20 million silent stares. Ending. "You will die today," she said finally. Her voice was hard, but it trembled at the edges. "I don't care how well you dodge. I don't care how calm you are. I will send beast after beast, soldier after soldier, until you fall. And when you fall, I will have your body displayed in every corner of this empire as a warning. Do you understand?" Dorian nodded. "I understand. And still you won't beg? Still you won't scream? I will never give you what you want, Empress." His voice was gentle, almost kind. "Not because I hate you. Not because I'm brave. But because there are people watching who need to see that it's possible. Possible to face death without becoming death. Possible to suffer without becoming suffering. Possible to be human when everything around you tells you that humanity is weakness." The Empress opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Dorian turned away from her then. He faced the shadows beneath the seats, where the undercasts had hidden, and where they would hide again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, always watching, always waiting, always remembering. "I fight for them," he said, his voice carrying in the silence. "I fight so they know they're not alone. I fight so they know that somewhere in this universe, there's still a person who remembers what it means to be free, even if that person is in chains, even if that person is about to die." He looked back at the Empress one last time. "You can kill me now, but you can't kill what I am. You can't kill what I represent. And you can't kill the thing they're all thinking right now in the dark." He smiled again. "The thing you're thinking too, even if you won't admit it." The Empress's voice was barely a whisper. "What thing?" Dorian's smile widened. "That maybe, just maybe, the Empire isn't as strong as it looks." The silence that followed was absolute. 50,000 people held their breath. The guards stood frozen. The Empress herself seemed turned to stone. And in that silence, somewhere in the darkness beneath the seats, a single pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then another. The sound grew, not loud, not defiant, not yet. Just a soft patter of applause from the shadows, from the invisible ones, from the people the Empire had never seen and never would see until it was too late. The Empress stumbled backward. Her guards rushed to surround her, to protect her from a threat that wasn't there, to restore order to a moment that had slipped beyond all order. But as they escorted her from the arena, she kept looking back at the man standing alone on the black sand. Dorian Vance hadn't moved. He stood exactly where he had been, facing the shadows, listening to the sound of hands clapping in the dark. The sound of people who had just learned something they would never forget. The sound of an empire beginning to crack. When the guards finally came for him, when they dragged him away to face whatever death the Empress would devise in her fury, Dorian Vance went willingly. He went calmly. He went with the same stillness he had shown since the beginning. Because he had already won. Not freedom. Not life. Something smaller and larger at the same time. He had shown them. All of them. In the arena. In the shadows. In the Empress's own frozen heart. He had shown them what a human being looks like when he has nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for. And he never moved. Not once. Not until the very end.
The end.